The ice shows no mercy. In Alaska, cold is not merely a climate, it is a way of life. It is a constant test, a way of defining human endurance. And in this frozen corner of the world where the sun can hide for months and the silence grows as thick as the snow, customs have arisen that for many would seem unthinkable, because in Alaska, isolation is so extreme, so profound, that even love, desire, and human relationships have adapted to survive. Here, sharing a woman is not scandalous. It is tradition. It is an act of trust. It is part of a survival system that dismantles any morality brought from afar. But it is not merely about lending bodies on a whim. In the oldest cultures of Alaska, the act of sharing one's wife with a visitor was not debauchery, but hospitality. It was a way to honor the other, to offer warmth, food, and yes, companionship. In a place where cold can kill you, sleeping next to another human being, feeling the heat of a body against yours becomes a sacred act. And so, among the Inuit villages, one of the most controversial and seductive traditions of the North was born, spouse swapping, as a symbol of respect and alliance. A traveler arriving from distant lands, an explorer, a trader, a guide, could be welcomed with a smile, a hot meal, a nip of fermented liquor, and on some occasions, the unspoken invitation to share the host's wife's bed. It was not an obligation nor a transaction. It was part of an ancestral code, of a worldview in which the body was not private property, but an instrument of harmony. Cut off for months by snowstorms, with no contact with other villages, without internet, without television, Arctic communities developed their own language of desire, one in which fidelity is not measured by exclusivity but by mutual respect, where a caress can be a gesture of gratitude, where desire is neither hidden nor flaunted, it simply flows, like the Yukon River when it awakes after months of ice. And although those practices are no longer universal or common in Alaska's urban areas, their trace remains alive, especially in regions such as Barrow, now called Utqiagvik, Point Hope, or the settlements on the Kuskokwim River Delta, where customs are not forgotten, only whispered. The women of those villages are strong, not because they do not feel cold, but because they face it with dignity. They are the ones who keep the fire, who care for the elders, who teach the children to read the sky and the footsteps of bears. But they are also women who choose, who know when to look, when to accept, when to refuse. In those remote communities, a smile is not an empty gesture. It is a language. And a simple act like offering a hot coffee in the middle of a blizzard can be an invitation. Because when the sun barely shows its face for a few hours in winter, any spark of human contact becomes a treasure. And it is in that context that the body acquires another meaning. In Yupik culture, for example, there is a term that has no exact translation in Spanish, ikayotuk, which means to be well accompanied in the darkness. It does not necessarily imply sex, but it does imply connection, shared warmth, a way to avoid losing one's mind when winter stretches beyond endurance. Because yes, in Alaska, solitude can be more lethal than cold. And sharing your partner for a night, for a moon, does not mean losing them, but preserving everyone's sanity. Women are not seen as property. They are seen as nodes of connection, as anchors of emotional balance in the villages. And although many of these traditions have softened or are kept secret today, there are still stories whispered among seal skins and pots of dried meat of men who crossed miles of ice not only to find food and shelter, but a look, a caress, a whisper in the night. The modern visitor may feel bewildered. In Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Juneau, life resembles that of any other American city, but all it takes is venturing a little further, taking a snowmobile deep into native villages, to discover that time does not pass the same way everywhere in the country, that there are places where the clock still ticks to the rhythm of sun, ice, hunger, and desire. There, tourists who arrive with respect and humility may be received very differently, not with hotels or shows, but with stories, rituals, silences, and in some cases with the possibility of experiencing something unthinkable in their culture, sleeping under the same blanket as a stranger's wife, with the tacit permission of her husband. Not as a game nor as morbid curiosity, but as part of a human pact that transcends moral judgment. But it must be made clear, this is not for everyone. These practices are not requested, they are not demanded, they are not bought, they are offered. And if they are not understood from within, they can become a source of conflict or misunderstanding. That is why those who have truly lived Alaska's mystery rarely recount it in exact words. They tell it with pauses, with glances lost in the snow, with smiles that do not explain everything, but hint at it all. The contrast between that tradition and modern life is increasingly visible. In the cities, young women study, work, connect through social networks, travel south. Yet many carry in their blood the stories of their grandmothers, women who wove their own parkas, who split ice with axes, who welcomed strangers with a bowl of soup, and sometimes with the warmth of their bodies. In some Inuit communities, the figure of the Nunak Parak is still remembered, a kind of ceremonial hostess chosen for her beauty, wisdom, and generosity, responsible for making the stranger feel welcome. It was not prostitution nor an obligation. It was an honor, a way to connect worlds, to unite cultures through shared pleasure. Because in Alaska, desire is not a sin, it is a tool, the oldest way to say, I acknowledge you as human. Because in the tundra, where everything can vanish in a storm, the only thing that truly matters is that human warmth. And if that warmth can be shared, even for a night, even with another, then it is worth more than gold. Therefore, Alaska is not just a territory, it is an enigma, a frontier between what we believe love to be and what it could be if we listened more to the earth, the body, the silence. Here, snow covers secrets but also preserves them. And you only need to dig a little to discover that under the ice beats a heart unafraid of desire because it has learned to survive with it. In Alaska, climate does not just mark the seasons. It shapes human relationships. Here, affection is as much an instinct as an emotion. When the thermometer drops to 40 degrees below zero and darkness reigns for more than 18 hours a day, priorities change. It is not uncommon in some communities for the human body to be valued beyond its appearance, for its capacity to provide warmth, uplift spirits, and alleviate loneliness. This need has given rise to social codes that the rest of the world does not understand, and that many do not dare to accept. During the harshest months of winter, the world shrinks. In the most isolated villages, like Shishmaref or Kivalina, reachable only by sled, small plane, or in some cases walking over ice, there are no bars, no shopping centers, no cinemas. Entertainment is reduced to gatherings around the fire, stories told in a hushed voice, and glances that linger longer than they should. In that environment, desire does not disappear. It transforms, it adapts to silence, to cold, to the unchanging routine of isolation. And when it becomes unbearable, it finds its expression in the most ancient and powerful form, contact. In these communities, the concept of sharing a partner, as misunderstood by urban cultures, carries no scandalous connotation. It is often spoken of as courtesy, recalled with nostalgia in the voices of the elders. In times of scarcity, when a man arrived from another village bearing meat, tools, or even simple news, he was met with gratitude that transcended the material. Sharing one's wife, even for a night, was a gesture of hospitality and extreme trust. In some cases, more than a sign of openness, it was a symbol of respect, proof that the visitor was worthy of entering the community's intimate core. But none of this is impulsive or spontaneous. In traditional cultures like the Yupik and Inupiat, subtle signals and unwritten protocols exist. The host does not propose it openly. The visitor does not ask for it. It is hinted at, intuited. A hand on the shoulder, a lingering conversation in the kitchen, a nod of assent, a sustained smile. The woman always is the one who decides. She reads the moment, she chooses. It is not about submission, but about emotional authority. These exchanges occurred for centuries without conflict or drama. They were neither frequent nor obligatory. They happened only when conditions allowed, when intimacy was necessary to forge alliances, to create bonds between distant communities. And while today these practices have declined under Western morality and Christian influence, they have not disappeared entirely. In many areas, they are still remembered as part of the recent past, as secrets that endure the snow and the oblivion. Alaskan women have learned to be many things at once: companions, mothers, hunters, leaders, guardians of history. In the Gwich'in community, for example, women are regarded as oracles within the family. It is believed they can read dreams more clearly and, thanks to their sensitivity, perceive changes in the spirit of the home. That is why, when a woman decides to share her bed with a visitor, it is not out of weakness or submission, but from an ancestral intuition that links desire and balance. In these cultures, love is not limited to possession. On the contrary, it is conceived as a river. If you confine it, it stagnates. If you share it, it flows. There is no room for ego or jealousy in a land where survival depends on cooperation. Here the we outweighs the I. A loving relationship is defined not by physical exclusivity, but by mutual care, by emotional presence, by the silent consistency of someone returning from the hunt with a piece of meat and a weary glance. It is important to understand that this way of life exists in regions where civilization, as we understand it, barely touches the edges. Where modern life arrives via weak radio signals or helicopters that bring supplies once a month. In those contexts, the value of a warm human body, willing to listen, to embrace, to simply be, multiplies, because the body is a lamp, a source of heat, a promise that you are not alone in the endless winter. And in that sense, the practice of sharing a partner also becomes a mental health strategy. In regions with high suicide rates, where seasonal depression strikes hard, where the hours of darkness seem interminable, human contact is a shield, a remedy. The night shared is not only pleasure, it is a necessity. Therefore, when visitors arrive in Alaska with fantasies or preconceived ideas, they often confront a barrier. Because this land does not open to haste or prurience, only those who respect the silence, who understand solitude, who allow themselves to be taught, can begin to comprehend the invisible codes that govern relationships here. And sometimes, as a reward, the traveler discovers that in a cabin lit by oil lamps, surrounded by moose hides and soft sounds, they can find a caress they did not expect, a warmth that cannot be bought, a giving born of ice, but burning like fire. In certain families, this tradition is inherited. Mothers explain it to their daughters, not as an obligation, but as a choice, as a way to respond to the world when approached with respect, as a means to preserve humanity amid an environment that often seems inhuman. Some accept it, others do not. And both decisions are respected. Because if something defines Alaskan women, it is freedom. A freedom also reflected in how they experience their sexuality. While elsewhere in the world the female body is a source of control and shame, here it is seen with different eyes. Women do not feel ashamed of their desire, nor do they display it. They carry it, keep it, offer it if it feels right. And to that extent, the foreign visitor, if observant, if able to read beyond the eyes, can sense that in this land of glaciers and northern lights, sensuality moves beneath the ice, like a secret current that not everyone deserves to find. In Alaska, love is not spoken, it is shown. Because when you live at the edge of the world, where silence can last for weeks and a storm can erase entire paths, words lose their value. What matters is action, the gesture, the care. And within this framework, human relationships take on a meaning that goes far beyond the romantic. They are pacts of life, bonds of complicity in the face of the abyss. Within many communities, especially among the Inuit and Yupik peoples, there exists an almost poetic way to describe the beloved, the one who walks with you over the ice without looking back. That simple phrase encapsulates a profound philosophy. Here, a partner is not a sentimental accessory. They are an ally, a fellow traveler, a presence that can mean the difference between freezing to death and waking at dawn with your heart still beating. Therefore, it is no surprise that family structures are often more flexible than in other cultures. Although monogamy has been promoted by introduced religions and contact with Western culture, traditional practices of sharing partners in certain contexts still persist, albeit more discreetly and symbolically. For the inhabitants of these regions, what matters is not so much exclusivity as harmony, emotional stability, trust built slowly over time. In that sense, the act of lending a woman, or more precisely of offering her company to a visitor, should not be interpreted through the eyes of the outside world. It is not about submission or commerce. It is a practice rooted in survival, in reciprocity, in the understanding that sharing human warmth can be an act of generosity as necessary as sharing food. Women in these communities are not objects of exchange. They are active agents of their own decisions. Often, they are the ones who suggest the gesture, not out of obligation but out of perception. Because the outsider who arrives, if he is worthy, if he shows respect, if he understands the unwritten code of the snow, can be welcomed in a way that transforms his life, and we are not only talking about sexual encounters. Sometimes hospitality is expressed in subtler forms. Sleeping together without touching, sharing stories under thick blankets, preparing a meal with special care. In Alaska, affection is expressed through silent gestures, serving the hottest soup, arranging the softest hide, placing a heated stone between the guest's feet. Each of these acts is a way of saying, "You are safe, you can trust, you are welcome." Often, these practices emerge during the depths of winter, when villages are completely isolated for weeks or even months. In that time, the world shrinks to a few faces. The routine becomes slow, introspective. Relationships change. Unexpected bonds form. Liberties are allowed that in another context might seem unthinkable. But in the heart of the Arctic, the rules change, and human connection becomes an instinct, a vital necessity. This kind of openness is also linked to a deep sense of community. In traditional villages, everyone cares for everyone else. Children are raised collectively, elders are honored and listened to, and sexuality, rather than being taboo, is understood as part of the cycle of life. There is no shame in speaking of desire. There is no guilt in admitting that sometimes the body needs more than shelter. It needs closeness. Of course, these customs have not been immune to evolution. Today, many communities have restricted or abandoned these practices for various reasons. Religious pressure, the advent of social media, Western formal education. But on the margins of civilization, where the ice still rules and tradition still breathes, the echo of these customs remains alive. One of the most fascinating aspects of this reality is how it has also influenced relationships among men. Instead of competition, many villages promote solidarity. A man who allows another to share his wife's warmth does so not from weakness, but from security, from the certainty that his bond with her goes beyond a single night, and from the understanding that in certain contexts, offering affection is offering life. In Alaska, the body becomes a refuge, and a woman who welcomes a man into her hut does not do so to give pleasure, but to share something deeper, her time, her silence, her space. That is why, for many visitors, these encounters end up being more transformative than erotic. Because they do not only touch the skin, they touch the soul. The extreme climate has even conditioned the way lasting relationships are understood. Marriages are often based on practical compatibility rather than the romantic ideal. What matters is knowing how to work together, hunt together, raise children under the harshest conditions. Romance, if it appears, does so in different forms. A new coat sewn by hand, a specially smoked piece of fish, a word spoken just before sleep. And yet, amid this hardship, love flourishes, silently but powerfully. Sometimes a couple forms after sharing several moons in the same cabin. Other times after an entire winter of shared tasks and exchanged glances. There are no dates or social media. There is intuition, closeness, time. Because in Alaska, there is no rush to fall in love, but there is also no distance sufficient for pretense. The idea of giving, of allowing another man to share a woman's bed, is also imbued with spirituality. In certain Inuit cultures, it is believed that bodies hold memories that are cleansed through proper contact. That there are men and women who bring with them energies that balance the home, and that a shared night, if given with respect, can renew the household's harmony. These beliefs, although no longer taught openly in schools, persist in oral tales, ancient songs, whispers passed between generations. They are part of the northern spirit, tough on the outside, warm within. And so Alaska becomes more than a frozen landscape. It is a mirror. One that reflects what we are when faced with the essential, the need for warmth, connection, belonging. Here, love is not measured in words or rings. It is measured in fires that never go out, in hides that are shared, in silences that embrace. In Alaska, silence is a teacher. It teaches one to observe before speaking, to listen before judging, and to accept that life, in these extremes of the world, obeys different laws. Snow covers the paths, but it also guards secrets. And one of the most fascinating is the scandalous rumor that men lend their wives to outsiders. Said that way, it sounds provocative, almost primitive. But like so many things in this corner of the planet, the truth cannot fit into quick phrases. To truly understand it, one must have felt the cold seeping into the bones. One must have spent a night without electricity in a shelter miles from civilization, where the only thing that matters is a shared blanket and a warm breath in the dark. There the rules change. Moral judgment yields to the logic of body and soul.